So my friends decided to take me out for a night on the town. I had told them in advance that I wouldn't be drinking. They, in turn, told me that they absolutely would be drinking. Oh well. The guys who took me out were, using fake names, Jim Dash, Matt Dash, and Bob Dash. Jim is an old friend from high school who knew both Emily and me. He's married and was absolutely floored when he found out what Emily had done. Matt was someone I met early on when Emily was working her job. Back in the beginning of her career, before John, there was a bride whose hair and makeup artist bailed at the last minute. Emily was the first person they called who could take over on such short notice, so she stepped in, and I helped by packing up all her hair and makeup supplies. Now, she's got everything packed efficiently, but back then, it was a mess. While Emily and the bride were getting ready, I sat with Matt, her groom, and we talked. I helped calm him down before his wedding, and we ended up hitting it off. We had a lot in common, and the time flew by. Over the years, Emily and I stayed in touch with him and his wife, occasionally going on couples dates. But for the most part, Matt and I just hung out with Jim. And then there's Bob, our single friend. Well, I guess I'm single now too. He's always been the odd one out in our group of couples, but the married guys made sure to include him so we could live vicariously through his single life. Wait, you can just set up a board game in your living room and leave it there indefinitely. Most of the time, we'd all get together to play D&D. Yeah, we're nerds. Bob is the dungeon master. That night, we went to a nice steakhouse, a welcome change from my usual diet of protein shakes. Eating was still a struggle, though. The guys weren't having any of it. Dash, eat your steak, you pussy. Followed by laughter. I got it all down like a big boy. Over dinner, I recounted most of what's in my posts, leaving out a few details. Even though I trust these guys, I didn't want certain information getting back to Emily. They were incredibly supportive, shocked at what she had done, and, honestly, at what I had done in response. They were pissed at Emily, to say the least. At one point, Matt mentioned that he had heard Emily was really struggling. I cut him off immediately. I told him I didn't want to hear anything about her beyond what we'd already discussed. After dinner, we headed to a country dive bar that Bob had heard about, the kind of place where the floor is basically one giant glue trap for human beings. My shoes were sticking so much that I had to stop and double knot my laces. That's how you know you're in a good dive bar, right? While they were downing beers and bourbon shots, I stayed sober. The last thing I needed was the alcohol fairy, whispering in my ear, telling me to call Emily, cry, beg, and then spiral into some dark place. Nope. A few days earlier, I had talked to my dad, and he advised me to steer clear of alcohol. Not that he had to worry, I was already way ahead of him on that one. But then he said, Dash, real men drink bitters and soda when they're not drinking at a bar. Not diet soda. Not mocktails. Those are for pussies. So, feeling like a manly man, I confidently asked the bartender for a bitters and soda. She smirked and said, Dash, okay, Grandpa, before pouring club soda and shaking a few drops from what looked like a brown Tabasco bottle into it. Thanks, Dad. But honestly, I liked the taste. As the night went on, I entered that weird, sober guy limbo where everything is still funny, but you know, in about an hour, you'll be babysitting a bunch of adult toddlers. Sure enough, the guys got progressively more wasted and increasingly enraged at Emily. They started talking about calling her up to cuss her out. I shut that down fast. I told them I had already handled it and reminded them about that video I've linked here a bunch of times, the one explaining how absolute silence and no contact is the best way to deal with a cheater. They actually seemed to agree. Jim was calling the female bartender Dash, bro. Meanwhile, Matt was downing a draft beer while shoveling steak nachos into his mouth right after. A full steak dinner. Keep in mind, he and his wife were pesky vegetarians. So, in a way, I had just aided and abetted dietary infidelity, much like Bev did with actual adultery. At this point, I have no shame. Matt, on the other hand, definitely paid for his sudden intake of red meat later. We had some lively conversations about politics and their relationships, just not mine. And before anyone asks, I have no idea if there were any pretty girls at the bar. I wasn't paying attention. Honestly, I felt like a burn victim, like everyone was subtly staring at me, sucking in air through clenched teeth. When the bar finally kicked us out at closing time, I took charge of getting everyone home. I herded them into Jim's minivan and, physically, stopped Bob from trying to buy a homeless man's dog. Jim did not need that smell in his van, and Jim's wife would have harpooned me. Meanwhile, Matt was doubled over, moaning and holding his stomach. I grabbed a trash bag from the little supply closet in the bar's restroom, just in case. I drove everyone home and let them deal with picking up their cars the next day. When I got Bob to his place, I figured I'd just cut out the middleman and dropped him off, directly in front of his toilet, head hanging over the side. I delivered Matt to his pregnant wife and told her that, for once, he'd be the one vomiting instead of her. She tried to bring up Emily, but I quickly shut it down. I don't understand why her friends are so invested in us getting back together, probably because they don't know the full story. I'm not about to start handing out details unless I have to. Then, I drove Jim's minivan back to his house and shoveled him into his master bathroom, where he promptly sacrificed his expensive steak dinner to the porcelain gods. Not my problem. I didn't pay for it. Jim's wife gave me a big hug and asked how I was holding up. I told her I was doing as well as could be expected. She told me to focus on whatever new beginning I choose next. That phrase seems to be in the top 3 things I keep hearing and saying lately. I got a ride back to the bar, made sure all their cars were locked, then drove my own car back to the hotel where I'm staying for now. Sunday night, we had a game night at Bob's place, D&D and code names. Nobody drank. I actually had a good time. Monday, I'm officially going back to work, by which I mean I'll be taking my laptop to a public library or a coffee shop to work remotely. I don't have any in-person meetings at my office this week, so I'm just going to lay low and start establishing a new normal dash. Sometime next week, or the week after, I'll be moving into my dad's friend's Airbnb remodel and helping out there in my spare time. That'll be home for the foreseeable future. As for the divorce, right now, we're still waiting on the credit card records. To my knowledge, Emily hasn't gotten a lawyer yet. Here's hoping for a default judgment dash. Meanwhile, my lawyer told me that John's wife reached out to her. No details beyond that. No word from Bev or her husband. But then again, they were Emily's friends, not mine. I did her husband a favor. What happens next is up to him dash. To answer some of the repeated questions I've been getting, the only overnight trips Emily took during the time period of her affair were when she went to visit her parents 3 times. I verified this each time, not because I was paranoid, but because I liked talking to my Emile and used it as an excuse to chat with her. The 3rd time Emily visited, she came down with the flu, and ML took care of her for a couple of days. I called daily. I'm pretty convinced she never spent the night with John. The closest she came was on New Year's Eve. Could my Emile have been covering for her? I guess it's possible. But she's very religious, and I genuinely don't think she'd do that. Not gonna lie, though, if I found out she did, it would hurt. As for Emily herself, I have no clue what she's up to, since I'm maintaining no contact dash. The only update I got was from Matt, who mentioned that his wife said Emily is dash struggling. That's all I know. If it gets really bad, I hope she gets help. I checked the security cameras. Looks like Emily has officially moved out of the house. I believe she's staying with her parents now, which means she's got a hell of a commute. She's probably taking time off work. I'll update if anything major happens. Otherwise, I won't be as active here as I was last week. Monday morning, I forced myself to get up early and get into a routine. Even though I don't have an office to go to right now, I knew I had to establish something resembling normalcy. I grabbed my laptop and headed to a coffee shop down the street. I figured it was better than sitting in my hotel room all day, spiraling. The place wasn't too crowded. Mostly people like me, staring at their screens, pretending they had their lives together. I got my coffee, found a corner table, and got to work. Emails, spreadsheets, all the boring stuff. It kept my mind occupied, which was the goal. Around lunchtime, I got a text from Matt. How's the first day of the new normal? I told him I was surviving. He invited me to dinner with him and his wife, but I declined. I wasn't in the mood to be a third wheel, even if they meant well. Instead, I went to the gym. I figured if I couldn't control anything else, at least I could control that. I put in my headphones, turned up the volume, and focused on lifting until my arms felt like jelly. It was the first time in weeks that my brain shut up for a little while. I didn't think about Emily. I didn't think about the divorce. Just the weight in front of me. By the time I got back to the hotel, I had a missed call from my lawyer. I called her back, and she got straight to the point. John's wife reached out again. She wants to talk to you. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what she expected me to do with that information. My lawyer hesitated before continuing. She didn't give details, but it sounds like she's trying to figure out what to do next. I sighed. Do you think I should talk to her? I can't tell you what to do, she said, the way lawyers do when they don't want to commit to an answer. But if she's looking for information that might help her in her divorce, it could be mutually beneficial. I told her I'd think about it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear anything from or about John's wife, but part of me was curious. Did she find out more than I did? Did she have proof of things I didn't know about? Would it even make a difference at this point? The next few days passed in a blur. I stuck to my routine: coffee shop, gym, sleep. I didn't hear from Emily, which was good. I checked the house cameras a couple of times, but it stayed empty. By Wednesday, I caved and agreed to meet John's wife. We decided on a neutral location, a park, public enough that it wouldn't be weird, private enough that we could talk. She showed up looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing an oversized sweater. She looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping much. I wondered if I looked the same way. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. I nodded. "What do you need?" She hesitated. "I guess. I just wanted to compare notes. Make sure I'm not crazy." I let out a humorless laugh. "If you're crazy, then I am too." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through some messages. "I hired a PI," she admitted. "I wanted to know exactly how long this was going on." That got my attention. And she turned the screen toward me. Screenshots of emails, texts, photos. Some of it I already knew. Some of it made my stomach twist. "They met up more than we thought," she said quietly. "Not just at work, not just after hours. They took trips. There's a hotel receipt for a weekend when Emily told you she was visiting her parents." I stared at the screen, my vision tunneling for a second. I wanted to be shocked, but deep down, I wasn't. Maybe I'd already assumed the worst. She looked at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I exhaled slowly. "Yeah, just processing." We sat in silence for a minute. Then she said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this." I shrugged. "Same." We exchanged a little more information before parting ways. I gave her my lawyer's number in case she needed it. She gave me the PI's contact info. "Just in case you want to see everything for yourself," she said. I wasn't sure if I did. I spent the rest of the day in a weird haze. Part of me felt numb. Part of me wanted to scream. I went back to the gym and pushed myself harder than usual, trying to drown out the thoughts. By Friday, Emily still hadn't made any moves. No lawyer. No contact. Nothing. My lawyer said that was a good sign. If she kept dragging her feet, I could move forward with the default judgment. That night, I went to Matt's place. It was supposed to be another game night, but I could tell he and his wife were treating it like an intervention. They kept asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I wanted to talk. I appreciated it, but I was tired of talking. We played a few rounds of code names, then Matt's wife went to bed, leaving just the guys. Jim leaned back in his chair. "You know what you need?" I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Another night out?" Jim grinned. "Nah. Hey, real, fresh start. Like something actually fun. Something different." Bob perked up. "Road trip." I snorted. "Where?" Bob shrugged. "Who cares? Anywhere but here." At first, I brushed it off. But the more they talked about it, the more the idea started to sound appealing. Jim smirked. "Come on. You need a distraction. What's stopping you?" I thought about it. Nothing, really. Maybe it was time to do something, actually different.